film, and she shows it in the series. People get a forum afterwards. So we have a pretty good venue for that.
Okay, so while we jump, you go to the cut.
Yeah.
I think we can get started. Thank you everyone for coming. My name is Kevin Drake. I'm the Energy and Sustainability Director for the Destination Medical Center in the City of Rochester. And this is our monthly sustainability series where we host people throughout our community and regionally to talk about sustainability related topics. Today we're focused on race and equity, and specifically City of Rochester government and their work with GARE, the Government Alliance for Race and Equity. Some may be wondering why that's a sustainability topic. The reason, the simple reason is underserved populations will probably have the greatest impacts of climate change inflicted upon them. So thinking about how we can address race and equity head on as it relates to our climate work, our sustainability work is critically important. As one sustainability director from Philadelphia said to me, if we don't lead with race and equity, what are we sustaining? Or aren't addressing these issues of racism head on. Really happy to have Anissa here today to come talk about what the City of Rochester is up to, their plans for this year. As usual, it's pretty light and breezy, so feel free to ask questions. That's the whole point of this series, is to help share best practices, talk about these issues. So thanks, Anissa, for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And if you all don't mind, I'm going to sit down. I'm hopefully getting over something and not getting worse. So that's my prayer. And I also apologize for the cough drop in my mouth as I try to speak here today. But as Kevin said, I'm Anissa Hollingshead. I'm the city clerk, and I'm also the director of communications for the City of Rochester. Within the City of Rochester, our communications and engagement work has a central home within my office. We have two aspects to our office, the clerk side of things and then our communications side of things. And those fit together very nicely in terms of the work that we do really being centered around helping residents connect to their local government and finding ways to have different touch points and interactions and be able to influence different policy decisions and things that way. So the clerk's office side of things helps administer the council process, our city records, all of those traditional components that people interact with, things like elections. So building the base from the ground up with our residents of starting with those connection points with government. And then, of course, in communications and engagement, we are focused on how we are best reaching out to our residents. And we have communicators around the organization. Some of them are here today. Thank you. Who help support that work. So we have a home base for it within our office. And that includes our race and equity work at this point. We'll talk about the work that the city's been doing with CARE, and specifically some of that. The cohort work began in 2018. That includes teammates from throughout the organization. So we'll talk more about that. But starting off today, some of you may have the question, why are we leading with race? What does that mean? Where is that coming from? And we talk about that because it does make a difference and impacts on final outcomes and across a myriad of factors. So when we're looking at multiple indicators, race is continually a predictor of outcomes. I'm guessing most of you in this room already know that, and that's at least a part of why you're sitting here. But we'll talk just a bit today about some Rochester and Southeast Minnesota specific data within this realm to help set the context for these disparities within our community before moving into how we apply a racial equity lens at an institutional and systems level so that we can really more effectively counteract and reverse some of these disparities. We're also going to look at different models for how organizations, specifically government entities, but there's certainly applicability to other organizations as well, can build their capacity for doing equity work and considering the impacts of race in the work that we're doing across all different organizations, including some specific tools that we're working with and working to incorporate into our toolbox so that we can become more intentional about addressing some of those unintended impacts related to race. So, given the tie as well to sustainability and climate change and issues like that, I wanted to share these photos. Some of you may be aware that most of the state of Mississippi is experiencing extreme flooding right now. This is not new. Last year, much of the Mississippi River flooded along the delta at historic levels. And we're very early in the year this year, and we're seeing, again, repeated historic flooding throughout the state and beyond the Mississippi Delta. The Pearl River runs through Jackson, Mississippi, and is experiencing very substantial rainfalls. That first picture there is actually Columbus, Mississippi, which is Lowndes County in the northeast corner of the state, and the impact that this has on people. And I wanted to share this as an example because my family previously lived in Mississippi. My husband's family is from Mississippi. We lived there during Hurricane Katrina, and we were in the northernmost county impacted by Hurricane Katrina and declared a disaster area by FEMA at that time. And I can tell you from firsthand experience and the impacts on community of that storm, not just then, but still 15 years later. And I think most of us have probably seen things about New Orleans and areas of New Orleans that 15 years past the storm, literally nothing's been touched. There's a disproportionate impact that has had on communities of color in that area, in that region. So, in the area around Columbus, where you see the bigger picture on the left there's a community that's called the Unit Community, and it's in rural Clay County primarily, but it actually straddles 4 county lines. And this is a rural community, but it has a sizable population. The population is actually much bigger than several of the surrounding towns, but it's never been incorporated. It does not have any political representation. Its boundaries are literally divided between 4 counties, so the residents have virtually no meaningful representation at any level. And none of this is unintentional. This is a community that's comprised of primarily African American or Black families who have been there for multiple generations, and it is literally the land that the white farmers in the area didn't want. So it's all in a floodplain, it floods every year, it looks like this in everybody's yard, you can't get down the roads, and just the structural inequities that are in play there at such a level that when people talk about, well, why is government talking about this issue? Why is government getting involved in talking about race as a policy consideration? Because historically over time, things have been done both intentionally and inadvertently to make race a policy issue and to create structural inequities in places like the Unit Community, where people who are already heavily disadvantaged have literally all the cards stacked against them to try to climb out of that. And for us in government to think that we can just move forward in a race-neutral way and not give any thought to the historical impact and systemic inequities that are in place is misguided and will result in continuing to perpetuate the existing inequities in place. And we can talk about this in Minnesota. This is certainly not exclusive to places like Mississippi. And I think that's a really key thing that we have to constantly remind ourselves of here in Minnesota. And I think most of us are aware that we have some really persistent racial gaps in Minnesota. So, to be fair, the measures that I was looking at from the state demographer's office in terms of ranking the state against others also include the District of Columbia. So where we're 50th, there's 1 below us, and 49th, 2 below us. So yay, we're not at the bottom. But when you start looking at the gaps between white people and people of color, Minnesota has some of the biggest gaps in the country. If you look at the median income gap, we're 50th in the nation. We got 1 state below us. I actually think it's Maine, but we're right up there. In specific southeastern Minnesota data from DEED, the Department of Economic and, oh gosh, I can't remember that. Department of Employment and Economic Development, I believe, the state agency lead, but their data for southeastern Minnesota numbers, specifically median household income in 2016, you can see was about $60,000. For African American or Black households, that median income is less than half of that, at $29,000. We are 49th in the nation in home ownership rate in Minnesota, and those levels are very consistent across Olmsted County as well. 49th in the nation with our poverty gap. When you look at, specifically for southeastern Minnesota, our poverty rate overall is very much in line with the statewide average at 10.6%. But our poverty rate for Black or African American households is 45.8%. So that is a massive differential. When we start looking at employment disparities, the unemployment rate for Black or African American residents in southeastern Minnesota is 17.6%. That's 4 times the rate for white residents in the area and 5% above the statewide comparable average. So statewide unemployment for Black or African American residents is only just over 12%. So we are significantly higher than that here. Looking also, DEED also does analysis on labor participation rates. And southeastern Minnesota overall has a lower labor participation rate than the rest of the state. But our highest rates of labor participation are actually amongst people who fall within different census categories, because this data comes from the American Community Survey using census data. And so our highest labor participation rates are with people of some other race, which is an official census category, or also as well people from a Hispanic or Latino background. Those lowest labor participation rates for us here are among our American Indian, Black or African American populations, and those who identify as 2 or more races. Now, where this starts to really be impactful for us as a broader community, besides the fact that this is certainly very meaningful to individuals who are experiencing this, but for the community as a whole, DEED has identified specific industries who are reliant more heavily on non-white workers in this area, and that includes our healthcare and social assistance agencies, accommodation and food services, retail trade services. So when we start talking about DMC and the growth that's anticipated with DMC and the growth that's already occurring with that, what that means for our labor market here, you can see that it's really an impactful thing that we have less participation in the labor market by those parts of the population that are both more heavily represented in areas where we're having difficulty filling jobs, and as well experiencing that way. I mean, this is some of the Compass Point data that was compiled in 2016. I know Cradle's Career, I think, was very engaged in pulling this work together, but borrowing from this, looking at our overall population growth, a lot of what came out of that work was the kind of distillation that our population growth is not enough to keep up with the demand for workforce. And there are more people exiting the workforce due to retirement and that sort of thing than there are entering the workforce. And the majority of the people entering the workforce are people of color. So for us to continue to grow as a community and have the services that we need and be able to sustain the different growth models across healthcare and all of the different jobs that are involved in that, all of the support jobs in transit and transportation, hotels, restaurants, all of that goes along with being a vibrant, growing medical community. We have to make sure that we have sufficient workforce for that, and we have got significant gaps and issues that are challenging that. For any of you who may have heard over the last several days, one of the other things that I'm working on right now is preparing for our March 3rd election. We are really short on election judges. We have a hard time finding people who are available to do election judge work. The census is having a really hard time hiring census workers. Employment pay for that has gone up to $25 an hour in Olmsted County to try to get more workers in. My kids love to go to a fast food restaurant by our house that's usually closed before 6 p.m. at night because they don't have enough people to work there to keep them open normal hours. So we're seeing this impact across our community, in multiple ways already. And it is essential for us to be able to address this in a meaningful way that can help sustain and support the growth that we are seeking to drive here in Minnesota, and specifically in the Rochester area. So why do we lead with race? I mean, we talked about some of these racial inequities that are very deep and pervasive. We are in a climate where racial anxiety is very much on the rise, and people are very reluctant to talk about it. But if you can't talk about it, and you can't name it, and you can't call it out, you can't address it. And so putting in place a structure that allows us to do that in a way that's not threatening to our teammates internally, to our residents, that brings more voices to the table and helps create a better approach to really creating a different type of institutional and structural approach is really important for us. And we talk about race explicitly because so many of these indicators can be tied very directly to race. But it does not mean that that's the only thing that we focus on. So certainly with the GARE initiative, it's the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. Race is at the forefront, but we always talk about the intersectionality of other potential variables that can be very impactful for people as well. So, and as this indicates, in a lot of instances, the approaches that we are using around race are very transferable to some other circumstances as well. But it is critical for us to make sure that we have that specificity around what are the true issues that we're dealing with and how are we going to start addressing them. So starting with what do we mean when we talk about what is racial equity? And you may have seen different illustrations over time. There's an illustration that's very widely used of children trying to see over a fence to see a baseball game and the boxes. This is another variation on that, kind of calling out the difference between equality and equity. Having everybody start at the same place isn't the same thing when you consider all of the factors involved. And so when you're looking at like a diagram like this, I think most of us probably have had to run on the track or got to run on the track at some point in our lives. And the outside lanes are longer than the inside lanes. And so if you have everybody start at what looks like the same starting point, they're not running an even race. So you've got that staggering there to account for the fact that there are different starting points and different circumstances for people in different lanes in this circumstance. But at the end of the day, our objective is really to ensure that we are at a point where one's racial identity does not have an influence on how one fares in society. And we're not there right now because we can look at indicators across the board and see and predict by race where people fall by and large, certainly not exclusively, but by and large, based on race. And so getting to a point of racial equity is getting to the point where your outcome is not predictable based upon your race. And it has to be actionable and it has to be measurable. And so that's a key part of what we've been doing at the city. Institutionalize some of the work out of GARE to make sure that we're being intentional around that and doing that in a way that we can provide measurable results. So when we talk about institutionalizing an equity focus, we've got different factors involved here in terms of looking at inclusion, giving people access to decision making, access to information and opportunities to play a role in our case, their government, diversity in terms of having representation at the table, around the table, and in the voices being heard. And equity is really about outcomes. We want to make sure that we're asking a different set of questions, that we're taking a holistic approach to our strategies overall, and that we're really looking at and analyzing what are the root causes of some of the impacts that we're seeing. And like I talked about, we have a focus on race, but that's not exclusive by any means. We always are taking that intersectional analysis. So other factors besides race can be at play in terms of gender identity, sexuality, race and ethnicity, income levels, So we certainly look at that intersectional lens of different impacts, but we start and center at race in that. And so as we talk about advancing racial equity, I think it's really, really key for us to talk about how when we're closing the gap so that race doesn't predict one's success, it's really about improving outcomes for everybody. It's kind of that universal design type of philosophy where when you talk about something like a curb cut, you know, we do curb cuts because the ADA requires it, so the law says we have to have them. It's also the right thing to do to make things more accessible to people, but it is also something that benefits people beyond just people who may have mobility impairments. So someone may be in a wheelchair and they have to have a curb cut in order to get access, but that curb cut also benefits the parent pushing a stroller, or somebody pulling a grocery cart, or myriad other circumstances beyond just the folks who have to have it. It provides a benefit to everyone in different circumstances. And so similarly, when we talk about racial equity work, we are talking about improving outcomes for everybody across the board. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not giving more to people over here because we took it away over there. It's the everybody does better when everybody does better. And that requires for us to be really intentional about instituting cultural change in our organizations and really prioritizing our actions and our resources to advancing equity. We've got to walk the talk. We can't just say these are our goals and this is what we want to do. It's how are we going to do it? What are we putting behind it? How are we being intentional about it? And how are we resourcing it? Our strategies, although we want to ensure that we're benefiting everybody, we really are focused on those improvements for those in our community who are worse off when we're looking through a racial equity lens. And focusing on changing institutional practices and procedures, not fixing individual people. And I'll talk about that as we talk about kind of training and kind of setting a baseline for things. It's really essential in that that we are focused with our teammates on, this is not about are you racist, on the individual level. It's talking about things on the systemic, institutional level. And really getting past just talking about services and different root causes to looking at changing our policies and institutions and systems to work better for all of our residents. An example from the Denver, Aurora metro area of how the economic benefits kind of can reach a whole region when you are focused on equity and start bringing things in alignment more. They estimated in 2015 that if they had been able to eliminate racial gaps in income, that would result in more than $31 billion more in their economy across that region, which, the Denver Aurora metro is very similarly sized to Minneapolis, St. Paul overall. And 31 billion, I thought that was misprinting when I saw that in their stats, but that's the impact of racial gaps in income in just that one region. So as we talk about institutional versus individual racism, as I said, this has been a really key part that we're trying to dial in at the city to help our employees understand that what we're talking about is not trying to figure out who says the wrong thing or holds individual bias or different things like that. That's not our starting point. Our starting point is what's happening at an institutional level. And so just kind of as a level setting, when we talk about this, you can start it's kind of a spectrum of looking at individual racism, different prejudgment or bias or discrimination by an individual based on race versus institutional racism, which is more focused on the policies, practices, and procedures that work better for white people than people of color, often unintentionally or inadvertently at this point. So, and then finally, structural racism looks at the history and current reality of institutional racism across all institutions and how that combines to create a system that negatively impacts communities of color. And so this slide is from the National League of Cities. They have a work group that's working with GARE in a project called REAL that I'll talk a little bit more about too. But and they kind of break down both institutional versus individual bias and explicit versus implicit, and how those pieces come together. And so on an institutional level, explicit examples of bias would be those policies that are explicitly discriminating against a group. So an example of that would be a U.S. court ruling that bans dreadlocks, or that upheld a dreadlock ban during the hiring process, and saying that that's legal. That's institutional, explicit bias or racism. More implicit would be those policies that are negatively impacting one group unintentionally. So for instance, law enforcement using stop and frisk methods of racial profiling for many years in many communities is an example of implicit institutional bias. On an individual level, implicit things that are kind of direct prejudice in action or discrimination by an individual against another individual or group of individuals. So for instance, a restaurant owner threatening to call ICE on Spanish-speaking customers. The implicit side of individual bias deals more with unconscious attitudes and beliefs. So an example of that might be in a hiring process, an employer being reluctant to call somebody who has ethnic sounding name. And that's something, that in repeated studies have been shown happens. So kind of breaking down a little bit of how that looks in different areas. So what are we doing here in Rochester right now? So I'm going to give you a baseline for where we're starting. I will tell you right away that we are at the very early stages of this work in Rochester. We have a lot of things happening and a lot of pieces starting to come together, but we are really at the point where we've got to bring that intentionality to how we're putting those pieces together in city government to really build a focus on racial equity into our actual practices day in and day out. We've got a good start in terms of having an organizational commitment to equity. Our city council has put social equity as one of its foundational principles when it did its strategic planning work a couple of years ago. The comprehensive plan that was recently updated, Planning to Succeed, also included a significant amount of work around analysis, community engagement, and looking at different trends across the community, projecting out growth, and identifying equity as a core value and theme coming out of that work. And that really helped set the stage as well for the city to start participating in the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, or as we lovingly call it, GARE. So we started with GARE in 2018. We had an introductory cohort. The cohort was led by one of our teammates from the library, as well as a teammate from the planning department at the time. It was Olmsted County, and there were teammates from throughout the organization that participated. For myself, it was the second time I got to go through a GARE cohort, as I did so in a prior jurisdiction as well before coming here. But that kind of gave us an opportunity to start getting our feet wet in things. So 2018 was the third year that there was a Minnesota-based cohort going through GARE together. And so all of the top 10 largest cities in the state have gone through GARE in at least 1 year, and our GARE members on an ongoing basis. Quite a few smaller jurisdictions have also joined. The year that we joined then, in this third year, several of the jurisdictions were sending additional introductory cohorts through, as well as doing implementation cohorts to start putting into action some of the plans that they made in their introductory years. So it's really a growing network that we're able to continue benefiting from in terms of the resources that they have available and the network connections with other organizations. So that's something that we're looking at, how we can further expand going forward, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. You may also be aware that Rochester has been designated as an intercultural city. That's a designation that the city pursued in 2018, initially under Mayor Brady, and Mayor Norton has been very involved in carrying that forward. We are at the stage in that work right now where we have just recently completed our index to kind of take stock of where we're at as a community. Not just the city of Rochester, but the entire community. in terms of different things that promote a more intercultural focus and a more inclusionary environment where all of our residents are valued and able to participate fully in the life of the community. And there'll be some next steps coming on that in the coming months and for an extended period of time around building out that work. So that's another network for us that's really been valuable, and I think that will really increase in value as we build out this work across the community. We also, as a city, as I mentioned at the beginning, have been increasing our focus on communications and community engagement across the organization and bringing much more intentionality to how we are doing those functions and to better ensure that we are communicating proactively and that we are being thoughtful as an organization about what our opportunities for engagement are, and that they're not just things that come around at the end of the process. Let us tell you what we're doing, and more of where are those opportunities to start engaging community throughout the process and design what the questions are or what the process will be and the issues that we're addressing before we get into the work, so that community has an opportunity to make meaningful impact there. There's also efforts underway around supplier diversity, specifically with DMC-related projects. That's a requirement of the funding associated with that we start doing some tracking on that, and it's something that can carry over into other aspects of the organization outside of DMC as well, to make sure that we're really being intentional in that area of focus. So, as we talk about how do we build our equity focus, there are a number of models to follow, and I'll share with you some of them that we've been working through from our work with GARE in particular. And so this is probably my favorite way to think about how this work operates and the different phases that it moves through. And it's really essential that it's not just a linear path where you start here and you go there. You're continually moving through these different phases in terms of looking at normalizing, looking at race and equity issues, organizing around those issues, and developing solutions and opportunities to be intentional in this way, and then operationalizing the work that you're doing, and again, moving in and out throughout that. I know that you cannot read this from here, and I'm happy to share my slides. I think Kevin said he'd post them afterwards too, and I'm happy to send them out. But this is a logic model that GARE provides as well that kind of talks about moving through those three different phases on the left-hand side in terms of normalizing, organizing, and operationalizing, and kind of considering different conditions and their impacts, but really getting at what are the concrete actions that we can take, what are the outcomes that we're looking for in that, and then ultimately what is the impact that we're trying to have in doing different things, so that we can be more systematic in kind of planning how we approach things. And like I said, it is not a linear map by any means. So the sample jurisdictional map from GARE, you're moving through these different phases of work, and what does that look like? And for us in Rochester to this point, we've done some phase 1 work, and then we jump into phase 2 work, and then we go back to some more phase 1 work, and because it's an ongoing evolution of process that way to get to where we need to be. And as I mentioned, the National League of Cities has also taken on the mantle of racial equity work, and has worked alongside GARE in developing specific areas of focus and a specific training program or development program called what they call Race, Equity, and Leadership. And it includes 4 primary components that they're focusing on: the training and capacity building side of things. They developed a racial equity training series for local governments, providing technical assistance to a cohort of local governments. Both St. Paul and St. Louis Park are participating in that. And then similarly, along with that technical assistance, building that network for those participating cohorts. Very similar to what we've been doing with GARE as well. And then also expanding special populations work, so that we're making sure that the work that is being done is as inclusive as possible and bringing as many people to the table as possible across the board. So as we go back to that diagram of the circle of kind of the best practices model of moving through, building an equity focus, we start with that normalizing side of things. And so this is where I talked about, for us at the City of Rochester, ensuring that we're focusing at the institutional level and not the individual level is really key to getting started with kind of creating that shared analysis and language around racism and equity. You may find this shocking, but people don't want to come sit in a room and have other people be, and you're racist, and that's racist, and that's a big fear for people. And so an important part of being able to start conversations is to have the opportunity to build that shared understanding that this is not about trying to call any one person out or, we're not focused on the individual level here. We are really focused on how are our systems operating and what are the unintentional or inadvertent impacts of those systems that we may not even realize. And what can we do about that? And why do we care about that? Helping all of our employees and teammates understand the historical role that government has played in perpetuating inequities and why government has to play a role in helping to resolve those inequities. And really helping to foster that sense of urgency in prioritizing these issues in governance. So as I talked about, for us, we really have done a good job, I feel like, of at least having a starting point of support for this work. And where we need to go with this is really establishing a clear baseline for ourselves and vision and mission for where we want to end up in this work. I have the intercultural studies graphic here because I think that a big part of what we're doing right now with the ICI index, that is being evaluated by the Council of Europe, which is the entity that oversees the Intercultural City Initiative. And as part of looking at that index, it's an evaluator of different measures of how the community here in Rochester is faring in terms of race and equity and intercultural collaboration and interaction and different aspects that way. So having an outside entity that has done this work with multiple communities around the world will be able to let us have this kind of baseline for where we are right now and recommendations and plans for how we move forward in a meaningful way that can really get to bottom line impact for our residents and our community. And that's really critical for us, I think. I talked about in 2018, we did our introductory cohort with GEAR. We are continuing that work. Our plan this year is to try to have our leadership team, so all of our department heads, go through another GEAR cohort. And so this is coming together with other jurisdictions around the state, primarily, once a month, looking at different equity practices, equity tools, each month on a different theme to help kind of build our collective toolkit and understanding. Because what we discovered, or one of the recommendations that came out of our initial cohort, was the importance of having buy-in and understanding for this work really from the top down. And so that was the recommendation, to have the leadership team participate in the cohort to really build that understanding and support. Because you may not know this, but in government we don't have unlimited resources, and it can be hard to carve out the time and energy and effort that's needed to focus in these areas. And so it's really essential that we've got that support and buy-in at all levels of the organization, but especially from our top leadership, to ensure that they prioritize making space for employees to do this work. Our initial year cohort is looking to transition into more of a core equity team for the city and be a support for that work across the organization. But what we have to really be taking care of to avoid is having it become a box to check, that, the GEAR team over here is going to go tell us everything we need to know about equity, or if we're looking at a policy, we'll just have the GEAR team look at it and then we'll know we're good. Well, no, it's an organization-wide responsibility and effort, but we do need to have champions that are able to help support our departments across all areas. and help in building out that work that way. One of the critical recommendations that we made after our initial cohort was the need for training, and this is something that GARE emphasizes very heavily, and looking first and foremost at doing a baseline training for the entire organization. I'm very glad to say that the City Council has supported that, and we do have funding in our budget this year to start pursuing that. And we are at the phase right now of scoping what that looks like, what that training entails, and how we're going to roll that out. Because again, we want to make sure that it's something that is supported throughout the organization, that is a priority for people to attend, and that it's done in a way that really encourages people to participate and engage in this work, and that does not turn them off from it.